So I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you now I want to say in person, but actually within the meeting time scheduled for this class. But I have to make it to the house to leave at 7 to end up going to a wedding in Oklahoma, flying out of Indy tomorrow. So I will just be posting this video for you. I wanted to use the first half of the video to cover the homework. I feel like the homework wasn't very clear. The homework sheet that I had posted was automatically a part of the class and has been for many years. In the past, there have been some answers that I don't think have been gone through well enough, and I, from now on, promise I'm just going to look forward the week ahead and do the homework before you do the homework, as opposed to assuming the sheets are accurate and easy to understand. So in the past, there were some of these that were hard enough that multiple answers were accepted, and some of that will be allowed, but I'd rather just go through it and look at how we could delve into this information as a class. I made some modifications that I think helped made it clear after going through it with a student, thinking about how I think and how others in your class think. I know some students who found the first assignment of the occupancy fairly easy, which is still hard when it's your first time using the building codes, found this extremely difficult. So I can imagine for the majority of you it was very difficult to find the answers. Although I was kind of shocked with the level of difficulty that I found in this assignment, there weren't more people who emailed me before turning it in to get more clarification. So if you do have questions or you think something is beyond the scope of what you've learned to do so far or beyond your understanding without more instruction, always feel free to email me and let me know, and I'll modify it, or I'll give you more supplemental information via the announcements. I don't want it to be something that you're spending 4 hours on 10 to 15 question worksheet, okay? I know you have other classes. That's not the point of the worksheet. But I'm going to start off by going through each of these answers individually and showing you how we use the building codes illustrated to supplement the level of difficulty in reading the straight building codes. So I'm going to start by sharing my worksheet here in front of me. I have some references, and when you're giving me answers, the more information you give me, the better that I can see your thought process. That way I can give you partial credit as opposed to just not answering. I see that there was no struggle put into it, or maybe there was struggle but you just didn't write anything down. I'd rather be able to give you credit for thinking you found the answer or getting close to finding the answer than no credit whatsoever. I'm a fairly lenient teacher, especially when I see people care about the assignments. So what is the maximum allowable area of a single-story Best Buy Group M occupancy if it is built using Type 2B construction unsprinklered? So my answer was, sorry, kind of glitched out there for a second. The maximum allowable area of a two-story building is 12,500 square feet, but that's per floor. So really the answer is just this 12,500 square feet. And I use chart 503. So chart 503 can be found in our chapter 5 that was given to us on Blackboard. And you can see the numbers going up, 502, 504. Here's the actual chart, table 503, allowable height in building areas. So I would look at my question. I see that it's a single-story Best Buy Group M occupancy if built using Type 2B construction unsprinklered. So I would come over here to my group or my occupancy M, and I would be pulling it over to this column right here where there's the 12,500, and I got that because that's Type 2B, so I pulled that down and met that up to where the M came over, and here I had my 12,500. On my digital book of the Building Codes Illustrated, which I can get through the eBrary from the links that I've given you in a previous week, I'd come down to Chapter 5, Building Heights and Areas, as I'm working with Table 503. And I'll give it some time to load. When I scroll down, you can see that page 50 gives me an illustration of 503 from my actual building codes book. So it's showing me an outline of kind of what that table looks like. And then this information shows me what I need to do in order to use the table. So it's saying I can pull over from the occupancy and down from the type of construction, and here's where they meet up. And it says 2 stories, 14,500 square feet. And here's a note that we don't necessarily have from our chapters. So of floor area per story. And then if I pull over to these notes in here, it'll talk to me and tell me that this 14,500 isn't for the 2 stories combined, it's per story. So that's how we know for sure that it was 12,500. So really we can have this book open in tandem with the actual chapters and be using this as our illustrated guide with instructions on how to better read those chapters of the building code we're in. So looking at number 2, what is the maximum permissible area increase with the addition of fire sprinklers to this Best Buy? We can see that I put down the information. The maximum permissible area increase of height is 20 feet in 1 story increase, but the 300% overall area increase. So my first bit of information, and this is really extra information, the true area increase is 300% area increase. But I started in order of my information of pieces that might be applicable to changes of size due to the addition of fire sprinklers. So when I went back to my chapters, so first looking at my chapter 5, I had come down from the chart 3, moving on to the next page, and was looking for the first hint of automatic sprinklers, which was what I was told was being added. So in 504.2, it says automatic sprinkler system increase, where a building is equipped throughout with an approved automatic sprinkler system in accordance with section 903.311. The value specified for table 503 for maximum height is increased by 20 feet, and maximum number of stories is increased by 1. So this matters in case, you know, we want to be in one of those construction groups above, and right now we don't have the allowable height necessary, but by adding the sprinklers, we might have the increase in height in stories, whereas before it was 1. So it's useful information. It's telling me if needed, I have these increases. So the height is increased by 20 feet if I need it to be, and the stories could increase by 1. But as I read forward, these increases are permitted in addition to the area increase in accordance with 506.2. So using the buzzword of the area increase, which was, if we go back to our question, what is the maximum permissible area increase with the addition of fire sprinklers to the Best Buy store? We'll follow along in our chapter book. Chapter 5, we see 506.2. So I'm going to follow through here. I'm only in 505.3, 505.4, so I'll keep going until I get 506.2. So I see open spaces, then here's 506.3, and really I think I just didn't read it also, 506.2 and 506.3. So there's where my 506.3 comes into play. If I'm scrolling down, then it says, where a building is equipped throughout with an approved automatic sprinkler system in accordance with section 903311, the area limitation is permitted to be increased by an additional 200% for buildings with more than 1 story above grade plane, and an additional 300% for buildings with no more than 1 story above grade plane. So then when I see I have the words area increase, automatic or sprinkler system increase, all in the same paragraph. And then I have a little bit of information about the stories given, and it says for 1-story building it'd be 300%. So I go back to look at my question. All of that sounds like things I was looking for. So permissible increase with an addition of fire sprinklers to this Best Buy store, which was in fact a single story, so 1 story. So the answer would truly be the 300% in area increase, and these allowed for our height changes and story increases, but we don't necessarily care. It's still single story, so true answer is 300% area increase, although all good information to know and kind of a stepping through until we make it to the right section, which really is 506.3. So for question 3, it originally read, list 3 conditions whereby a mezzanine would be permitted to increase the area of the Best Buy store above the basic limits. And I already had so I filled this homework out. I had a master answer key, and without looking, I got the correct answer. But I don't think that it was clearly enough worded. It was kind of a stretch for me to fill it in as it was worded this way. So I changed it on Blackboard. In the announcements, I had said the following questions can be omitted or the wording should change. So for 3, I said the wording should say, list 2 exceptions whereby a mezzanine would be permitted to increase the area. Looking then at my chapter 5, so I'm hunting for the word mezzanine, and I can see that on 505, section 505 of the codes, I see mezzanines clearly called out in bold font. And then I have a couple of different paragraphs. So the first one says general, and then the next one says area limitation. So if I read back to my question, it says, list 3 conditions whereby mezzanine would be permitted to increase the area, and then I said this really should be list 2 conditions whereby it would increase the area of the Best Buy. So coming back into here, I see area limitations, and then here I see exceptions to the limitation of area. So that's telling me that there is an increase because it's an exception by which I'm allowed to have more area. So looking at the exception, sorry, I scrolled down past it. Don't want to, it's trying to skip pages for me. I see the aggregate area of mezzanines in buildings structure type 1 or 2 constructions for special industrial occupancies in accordance with 503 shall not exceed 2/3 of the area of the room. The aggregate areas of mezzanines in buildings and structure types of 1 and 2 constructions shall not exceed 1/2 of the area of the room in buildings and structures equipped with an approved automatic sprinkler system in accordance with section 90311 and an approved emergency voice alarm communication system in accordance with section 907. So it's telling us that these are the times in which there is an exception to this area limitation when we have these special industrial occupancies in accordance with that section. It can have it, but shall not exceed 2/3 of the area of the room. And then for the aggregate area of the mezzanines in buildings and structures type 2 constructions, it shall not exceed 1/2, I believe, of the area of the room in the buildings and structures, but has to be have in accordance with an automatic sprinkler system, as well as if it has voice alarm communication systems in accordance with section in accordance with section 907. So they're exceptions to the rule of size given that information. So really I think it's clear, although I've been told even rewording it that way is not necessarily clear. So this is where your feedback is helpful to me in rewriting it for future people, not as helpful for you, but going forward I'm going to try and read everything in advance so that you don't have to worry about it being this impractical again. Okay, so there is where we get the answer for question 3, and I had hoped that at least changing the question you try to struggle with it a little bit more and possibly end up with the right answer. So question number 4, what is the maximum allowable area of a Best Buy one-story M occupancy if it has fire sprinklers and an open yard of 60 feet in width around the entire building perimeter? The answer to this was easiest found on page 57. So and let me write this in here, you can see my screen, of the building codes illustrated. So sometimes it's easy enough for us to use our charts, and maybe it isn't, it depends on the person or how many times we've been through it. So for me, I can read chart 503 and kind of have deduced from this question right away to find this material. But when we get into things with exceptions, incidental use is pretty hard, amount of information given to us about fire sprinklers and additional information in increases in widths, whether it be yards or areas of way outside a building. The more pieces of information added into the equation for increasing the size, the harder it becomes to read it directly out of our chapters. So we want to use that Building Codes Illustrated more and more. When I go into page 57 of Building Codes Illustrated, so that's my digital book, and right now I'm on page 50, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, and while I'm flipping through, just see all of this information it's giving you. It's helping you out with sprinkling. So here's 57. So here I'm looking for code words or very big prompting words within this text as well. So yard, that was one that we could have been using as a significant word we don't see very often. And here we see notes. Yard, permanent open space around the sides of a building. We refer back to our question and we see what is the maximum allowable area if it has a 60-foot open yard all the way around it. So open yard all the way around the entire building perimeter. Here, permanent open space around the sides of a building. So that's a good indicator. We pull this information over and it says 60 yards. Now our question is in feet, but I know that yards are greater than feet, so it falls under these categories as being at least within the realm of 60 yards or more. So if we have an open area of 60 feet in combination with our building, so we can come down here and then find our occupancy. And we also see up here it's sprinklered or unsprinklered. So for us it's sprinklered 60 yards, which under that falls 60 feet. And then we find our occupancy, which is M, and we can pull it over and we see that in reality, given those parameters, it would in fact be unlimited. I think I'm having a crazy moment. So my mind is just bending on me. And I think it was from an earlier meeting. So when I met with a student earlier this week, they were saying, here's 60 yards. And I was thinking of it as space requirement. But really, it's saying 60-foot yards. So here's our foot measurement, and then here's yards. And then here's what a yard is. So 60-foot yards. Yard is a parameter or open space around the side of the building. So it's not saying the measurement yard, because here we have it in feet, and this is really what it's referring to. So actually it meets all of our parameters. Sprinklered 60-foot yard And then down here, our occupancy, which is unlimited. That is how I believe it is being read, not as yards, as in measurement. So this is where we'd find it, and we would have found it with the question flipping through. So unlimited area of the buildings is here, but one page before that we have our area modifications, and it's due to sprinklers, and the area is modified given sprinkler information, and then also given sprinkler information in combination with added yardage, or by yardage I actually mean foots and yards base. So all of this follows in the order that it's laid out in the chapters of our building and lighting book. For question number 5, what is the maximum incidental use space that Best Buy may devote to storage without being required to construct a 1-hour fire separation between the storage and the sales areas of the building or having to add sprinklers? I have an answer to this. I think that's way beyond the realm of what you would be able to find easily. So I decided to omit it from the grading this week. And I'll look at where we were all at. None of you emailed me except for 2 people who contacted me about the difficulty of it. I heard a lot of people talk to the difficulty of the project with each other, but just not their instructor, which isn't helpful for me in being more lax on the grading and changing it to be a better assignment for you right away so you don't have to struggle that large amount of time. So we omitted 5. Question 6. What is the maximum allowable area of a single-story Bob Evans restaurant Group A2 occupancy with VB construction? So this is another find the chart and follow it according to its occupancy and construction type. So VB Group A2 occupancy. So I could refer right back to my 503. If I wanted to, I could review my Building Codes Illustrated way to read this. So A2, and pulling that over, and V type B, so A2 VB equals 6,000 square feet. And again, if I'm having difficulty and I want to review why that is, I can pull up my eBrary book and go back to where it reviews the coverage of Table 503 and how to do that. So then it says, what is the maximum allowable area of the single-story Bob Evans restaurant? Oh, sorry, I'm reading the same one. You can tell I'm ready for my vacation. So how many stories tall can the Bob Evans, that is A2 occupancy, VB construction, be? So I would go back to my chart, find where that information lined up, A2 over, and type B, and here we have the regulation of stories above the 6,000, and it says, as is, it can only be 1 story. Now remember, that modifies when we add our sprinklers in, and it can also modify given additional space outside of the building, so a yard of a certain size. But for now, all we know is this information, so we just pull each of those rows and columns together to give us the 1. Moving forward, we have what is the maximum size furnace that Bob Evans can install in a mechanical room without construction of a 1-hour fire separation or adding sprinklers. So I utilize chart 508.25 in chapter 5. So if this is 503, I'm going to go ahead and move until I start to see the number 508. And here I have this exception, 508.2, furnace room where any piece of equipment is over 400,000 BTU per hour input. So then we have the 1-hour provided automatic fire extinguishing past this size. So this is in fact the maximum size of a furnace that can be used before that requirement is needed. So number 9, what is the maximum allowable seating area of school field if it was a building using type 3 construction? I think that this just got confused in my delivery to you yesterday. Really, I wanted to get rid of, and after talking with enough of you, I found the correct answer myself in doing the sheet. I think we needed to get rid of the word seating. I think on the website I changed it to occupancy, which was unclear. So get rid of the word seating. So what is the maximum allowable area of school field if it was a building using type 3 construction? And then we would just be finding our occupancy type and pulling it over to the type 3 construction on our 503 chart. So I said it was tricky because of the wording. It just needed to be cut out, all that tricky wording. I don't think it's necessary, and take it back to the chart for face value. I'm not going to cover every single one of the 503 charts. I think they're straightforward once we have enough information. So for number 10, it had just flashed an answer and then the answer disappeared most likely with the recording. I backspaced it because the original answer that was in the master key wasn't taking into account the individual floor square footage. It was using some type of division that's unnecessary and I think a little archaic given the newer codes. So that's one where I want to look at your answers without being prompted of using the chart 503 and the type of occupancy and some other information to figure out the answer. But I do feel like it was straightforward. I went through the true answer with 2 or 3 students and they all got the same thing without me giving them the answer. Number 11, what construction type would allow the greatest possible area for a 3-story prison occupancy without fire sprinklers? So back to our question 11, what construction type would allow the greatest possible area for a 3-story area prison I3 occupancy without sprinklers? This is again using chart 503. So a 3-story prison I3 without sprinklers, greatest possible area. So I'd find I3 and then at least 3 stories, but here I have an option for unlimited area and unlimited stories. So really the greatest area that I could have would be if I were to use the type 1A for I3. So for 11 it's type 1A. For 12, which construction type would you recommend for the 10,000 single-story drive-in shine, car wash, group occupancy B without fire sprinklers or other allowable increase? So for that one, we're saying it's 10,000, at least 10,000 square feet drive-in shine, group B occupancy. What would I recommend? So I come over from my type B and I know that I need at least 10,000, so I can't use 9,000. It has to be greater than that. It's 10,000 area. And then I have my type A for VA brings me down. So back from here, B over to VA because 18,000 is great enough. My 10,000 falls into it. And then we could have upwards to 3 stories if we needed to. But it covers everything we need. So the answer is B. Pull it over, find the type that allows for at least up to 10,000, and for the stories that we have to cover, which is only 1, so we can choose VA as our answer. For 13, besides an open space on the property, what other open space may give Drive and Shine an area increase? I have that being a mezzanine, and I have that from both, it says here 53 on the building codes illustration, which if I go back out to my eBrary book, here's 53, and it talks about mezzanines and shows how that can add to the space that we're using. And then I also could have gotten it, I felt, through the chapter as well, looking at the increase due to mezzanines just by using chapter 5 and reading through it. We could logically deduce that there were only 2 options to add space outside of sprinklers and the yard, which then would give us mezzanine as the final option of things mentioned in the chapter. But it does a good job of outlining more clearly for us mezzanines on page 53 of the Building Codes Illustrated. So then for 14, what would the required fire rating be to separate a rub and dry cleaner's S1 occupancy from a Midas muffler shop H2 occupancy if they were adjacent to one another in the same building? So I would pull up my chapter 5, and I had said 5084, so I'll pull down until I get into 5084. And here I can see, according to 508, oh, am I missing it? I know that I want to use this chart is really what I'm going to use. 508.33 for separated, required separation of occupancy in hours. So using the chart, here's where I can see I have S1 occupancy here, and I want to pull it over to figure out the fire rating until I hit H2 occupancy here for required hours of separation, and here I have 3. So that's how I use the table to find it. But I do feel like there was a section in here, I'm just missing it, 5084, 5083, maybe I totally made it up. Individual occupancies should be separated from adjacencies, 334. I must have totally made it up, or there must be something that I'm missing, but really you just needed that chart, and I probably just meant 50833. So I will go ahead and change it on here so that you can see that change, 5083 chart, and you just pull the columns over just as we did in 503. What is the primary difference between type 2 and type 3 construction? So those I think you could find easily by reading your building codes. I had 69 in Building Codes Illustrated construction classification. And then there's a number of buildings. So here's a few listed on my screen, which were originally offered. And then the South Bend Tribune office is in fact one. I wasn't necessarily looking, so again, I didn't write the original, but when I had done this one, I know that the instructor didn't necessarily say this, but when I got my feedback back, they're looking for materials that qualify a building to be considered that construction type. So the information on those materials can be found in the Building Codes Illustrated book. And then it was more of a guess by looking at the exterior of the building and saying, I believe it's made of those materials and therefore has that classification. So I had a few students give me some guesses of those, and a couple who were indeed correct. And some of us don't live in South Bend, so I might toss it out all together or use it as extra credit towards some of the things that were way out there. In 19, or 17, let's see. What is the required fire resistance rating of a load-bearing exterior wall in type 2A building? And so this had been an original answer a long time ago, but the codes have since changed. So my answer was 1 hour according to the Building Codes Chapter 6, Chart 601. So what is the fire resistance rating of a load-bearing exterior wall in any type 2A building? Let me open my now Chapter 6, which I had both of them open. 601. So I scroll down until I find table 601, fire resistant rating requirements for building elements. And then I can look back at my question and say resistant rating for load-bearing exterior type 2A. So I want to find bearing walls exterior type 2A. And here I come up with 1. Group 19, there were multiple answers to this. This is just one of them. And that one I felt like was all over the place. So in as much as I'll be accepting quite a few answers, your Building Codes Illustrated book gives you a couple. So it doesn't have to just be one answer. And then type number 20, what is the minimum allowable thickness of floor planks without floor coverings used in type 4 construction? Here I have an old answer, which I said was due to nominal increases or decreasing, actually, where we used to think of like a 2x4, and our teacher used to say it's not truly a 2x4. So I think that now they say specifically the nominal 3 inches according to page 79 of our Building Codes Illustrated, which is our digital book. So I can find page 79. Oop, oop, oop. 79. And in here is where it talks about the 3-inch thickness. All right, so that covers our homework assignment. I'm going to spend about 30 minutes more just going over a really quick overview of our PowerPoint for this week as it relates to walls and stairs and assemblies. So now I have open our 200 lighting building session 5 floor ceilings assemblies walls stairs. This will be now only going for the 3rd edition of our lighting and building book. So any 2nd edition answers are not going to cut it for the quiz. I'm only testing now to the 3rd edition. At this point we should all have the 3rd edition. If not, possibly come into the lab and borrow a friend's and still be working on getting your 3rd edition. I did upload the chapter to this week, so chapter 5 is available. That's another option, but that option's only going to run for 2 more weeks after this, where you can use the digital copy of the book because I can only scan so many copies. So floor assemblies and ceiling assemblies. So for floor assemblies, sorry, I'm going to take the level of my voice down because there's another class going on. For floor assemblies, we have the use of them for structure support, fire control, thermal qualities, humidity control, airflow, and acoustics. It's an opportunity for us to hide the plumbing, certain parts of the electrical, and the mechanical. Things that we have to consider when picking different flooring materials and assemblies are the amount of deflection, vibration, and load types. So ceiling assemblies have similar things that we are concerned with, such as humidity, that goes for both the floor and ceiling assemblies, acoustics, thermal radiation, so we put thermal qualities under both, and fire control as well. In those ceilings, though, we usually have more of the fire protection equipment and things related to the HVAC, such as sprinklers, diffusers, all sorts of stuff that we're not necessarily going to have in the ground. They can be exposed or enclosed. Oftentimes, the amount of money it takes to do an exposed ceiling well will be equal in cost, if not more expensive to that of the materials such as ceiling tiles systems that can enclose the ceiling. So flooring concerns. For flooring concerns, residential and contract, we have the idea of using tile over a floor that doesn't have proper humidity control. I used to have that all the time when I was working with clients. A lot of times you'll get into a bidding situation when you're in contract design, and you might have a flooring manager or a company that you use who's trying to bid against a certain job. And the client is trying to get the numbers down, so they want people to come in under. And oftentimes what the contractors will do is they'll pick a thin set grout that's not appropriate for the application, or they won't do proper humidity testing and really temperature testing before they install the floor. There's little corners that get cut in order to bring the cost of their work and labor down, and we end up with cracks like in the upper left, or we end up with moisture issues like in the upper right. Other things I've seen with flooring concerns, very popular now, are the cement floors that are painted or stained concrete. And something that people don't consider are the importance of ordering your building materials and how they're laid. So we would always want to do the floor before we put on the baseboards, which sounds pretty obvious, but sometimes contractors don't get in if we don't have a good designer and programmer, project manager. Many of us might become a project manager, whether we want to or not, in eventual situations. So I had a client in the contract field that was very unhappy that their main contractor had put on the baseboard and all the door frames before the cement was poured, and so the people who stained the concrete didn't want to touch it, and they left about an inch or two of unstained cement and concrete between the floorboard and the rest of the stain. So always thinking about those tiny details are concerns as well. It's not just things to do with the location and site as much as thinking about our control over the situation and things that people might say, oh, who's going to notice? Well, we will definitely notice. Steel floor assemblies. So here I have an example of a steel floor assembly at the top. Steel frame buildings usually employ steel decking, precast planks, or concrete slab floors. The steel beams support the decking or precast planks, and in turn supported by the steel girders, columns, or load-bearing walls, which are parts of the steel skeleton frame. So here we can see where we have the sheeting of the steel on top, and then we have, so the overall rectangle is the steel sheeting. We'll have support members running horizontally, as well as these vertical beams that are thicker. We have a perimeter member that's the same thing as what they're talking about beams over here. In the below picture, we can see the beam running all the perimeter of the space, and then we have our girders supporting the weights of the beams, and then we have our joists that would fall between each of the beams. And sometimes we'll have a few of these triangle supports and connectors at each of them for added structure. And then here's just another reiteration of that. So we might have mesh that's applied in here as well that helps with non-fire spread. So different pieces that go in. We'll have some shear studs that are in combination with our joists. And here's just our sheeting and the universal beam, which was seen in the above a lot clearer. I gave you a link to this KingdomConstruction.com where you can go and look at all the product specs that were shown here and how the pieces go together. They also show a number of applications that I don't think your book illustrated very well. Here we have open web joists and precast slabs. Last week we saw precast stairs or other precast parts of the building that are craned in to our work sites. The precast slabs work in a similar way. We'll run steel through them and connect them in a structure, but that way we don't have to pour the actual concrete on site. Here's a steel floor deck and some steel beams from underneath. So this is another example that I wanted to give of a steel flooring system. And it's not only a steel flooring system, so I gave you a link below to Access Floor Systems, and it gives you 3 examples, which not all of them are mentioned specifically in the book. So we do have, and it's really talking about this panel in here that's going to sit atop the girders. So we have a cement version, we have a all steel version, and then we have a wood version that's wrapped in aluminum or steel. So these can make up these floor assemblies. And there's tons of parts and pieces that go into creating the best floor assembly given a certain space. So for mechanical rooms or even computer labs, we might have as complex devices underneath, such as the data and wire management system, kind of a trough and a grid that we can control our wires, or perforated panels for airflow. We also have these baffles that are covering up pieces of the floor area. They'll divide vertically between, and what this allows for is if one of these wires catches fire on the other side, this is a firewall that'll just stomp it out before it makes it into the rest of the floor. So it's really a good safety blockage and protection in rooms that have tons and tons of wire, a lot of hot electrical running underneath them. So just information outside of the book. I wanted to give you some actual everyday application things to be thinking of if you decide to go into those details in a future project for school. These are kind of the interesting things we don't see people have time for. So you'll encounter them a lot in contract. So I worked with a furniture dealership that dealt mostly in panel systems in offices. And offices are definitely made up of this because of the planums running beneath them, multi-floors that have to have this much data and wire management on each floor. So how do we position the furniture also over these areas that we need heavy access to these things in a way that it's not going to make an electrician charge us an arm and a leg every time. There's also wood floor assemblies. I didn't do a whole lot on that. I think it's pretty straightforward. So that's where we have these treated runners and then boards that run across for added support, almost like a joist in a way, and then a 2x4 treated joist running the perimeter, and then we'll have some type of wooden subfloor going over it, and then a board, and there might be 2 layers, like a purely flat slab floor that is larger, maybe a 4-foot by 2-foot board, and then we put our actual materials on. Sometimes we'll have an added moisture barrier in between them. So here in the corner you can see solid wood flooring, blind nailing, and then here's the plywood subfloor, but here's some asphalt felt. That was why I was saying sign a protective layer. Here we could have an adhesive with a plywood subfloor. Here's an example of adhesives or foam pad. So it all depends on the amount of money spent on a project, to the amount of underfoot softness that's needed. So for example, when we're laying linoleum or vinyl, or we might put pad or we might do direct glue down. It depends. Now if it was a nurse's station, we might have some type of padding because they're on their feet 24/7. Or if we're doing heavy cart rolling, we might have some type of padding to prevent the friction that could cause our floor to peel up or break due to not having enough of that bounce in it. Other times bounce can be bad and it lends itself towards cracks, like with our first pictures of tile. So here were just some different types of wood flooring that could go over our subfloor. We have our quarter sawn, our traditional laid flooring, this type of intruded material. So this one I just thought would be a cleaning nightmare. And I wish I had the bigger picture, but it truly was boards just like in these pictures up here, but with these indentations on each of the boards. I just couldn't not imagine cleaning that every day. And this is a contract product that's really, it's more for hospitality or for retail design, but it actually has a high rating even though it looks fairly antique in form. The numbers of layers of finishing that they've added to it and fire protection makes it that retail quality. Ceiling assemblies. So plenum between the floor and ceiling. I know this is a very bare slide, but I felt like it was fine for what it was. And I had originally had a bunch of pictures, but I want to leave it at this because we're going to come back to it at a later time. So here we have our HVAC diffuser, sprinkler head. When I talked about fire protection, HVAC in the ceiling. This is the layer of acoustical tiles. Then we'd have our T-connectors, which help to hold the tiles up, and that's this. So you're seeing the metal string, the T-connector that is holding the grid system. We'll call it the grid system. And then that metal piece that's being tied up here into our beaming. And then here's some ducts that are running above the ceiling. And then we'll have electrical, conduit, and here's our girder. So here we have this plenum that's running through here, and then the support for the next floor above and the concrete floor on the steel deck. So that's how we have multi-tiered, multi-storied buildings, ceiling to floor, ceiling to floor, ceiling to floor. And then here's just some inspiration photos of what could be designed, just the amount of fire codes that went into that roof. If you only knew how many blocks and stops there are just for fabrics alone in commercial settings or in hospitality. There's so many things that have to pass and certificates. I can only imagine how many detailed drawings and approvals they had to go through to do something like that. So ceiling assemblies can be decorative. They don't have to be having a ceiling plenum that's easily accessed. Sometimes we have purely decorative ceilings, in which case we have to think about what materials we're applying. I mean, the more permanent, the less access we have. We had that in another building where a designer I knew I worked with, we took it from ceiling tiles to plaster, or we'll say drywall. Really, it was drywall. And then they found out that what was above in the plenum, they didn't have a good access point after doing that, but the contractor never said anything, so we had to break through that drywall not more than 3 months after we set it. So it was bad planning on both designer and on the contractor side. He should have let us know a little bit more about that plenum, but it'll happen. So with this looks extremely complex, but in reality, these are just crossing pieces of wood, and then this is a light fixture that is being hung by that same type of metal cording. So it's a lot more complex than it truly looks, and it comes as one system. And then here we just have an illuminated backlit panel with a light above and then it's recessed into the ceiling, and then it has a metal cover that wraps the inside and bends around the front. So there's lots of options for ceilings. And here's just some more options for floors. We have angles and bends, we have plaster, we have drywall, we have tiles within tiles, so these look like they're individual tiles. Really, this whole set is one piece in here. Wherever you see the true thicker connections is this entire size of the tile. Here's basically a lining installation that functions as one large metal tile that's connected at the corners and screwed directly into the wooden ceiling. So concrete floor systems. Ooh. There's my good side. So this I thought was interesting. Here we have the waffling that's used for concrete ceilings and sometimes floors. And I think that they've done a really good job. Waffling used to be an ugly thing that was used mostly in garages or in storage. But now they've taken it and completely contemporized it and added in abilities to weave throughout the HVAC, the lighting, the plumbing in a beautiful way that makes this a very comfortable working space. Now a lot of that has to do with color selection. They kept it fairly neutral, not that stark white. But I think that it's a really cool concept. So these are the little details that the ceiling is the most forgotten about. And I'll say that I'm not teaching advanced this coming spring anymore, but if you want to ever run your ceilings by me in points of interest, I'd love to do that with you, because that's where we get the most fun going on in a space, to have a variety of ceiling heights, to have a variety of ceiling materials, some trays, some ceiling tiles. We have to be thinking about the use, the accessibility, where it's practical in a one-person office to have drywall, but then in a large open office to have tiles. But the tiles don't have to be boring. It can be something like this waffle system where we almost get rid of that plenum space and are creating a floor support in tandem with our HVAC support. So here we have just the different types of joints that are used in our concrete floors. We have saw cut or we have tool, keyed and doweled. Sometimes if we really want to reinforce a joint, we can apply a metal to it. Stairs. So I'm going to breeze through stairs. I don't have a lot more time left.